3 years ago, the Houston Texans were considered one of the worst organizations in professional sports. We didn't have a franchise quarterback, we had very little young talent, and we were dealing with the fallout of the Deshaun Watson saga, an aging roster, and years of poor decisions. National analysts ranked Houston as one of the least desirable jobs in the NFL. Now fast forward to today. Texans were back-to-back AFC South champions and have won playoff games in 3 years in a row, have one of the youngest rosters in football, and are now legitimate Super Bowl contenders. So what changed? Most people will say CJ Stroud at quarterback, others will say DeMeco Ryans at head coach, and while both deserve a ton of credit, none of it happens without one man, General Manager Nick Caserio. He didn't just rebuild this football team, he rebuilt the entire organization. Today, I'm here to explain why Nick Caserio is one of the smartest general managers in the NFL and why the Texans are built to compete for years to come. Hello everybody, my name is Texans Takeover, and if you haven't, please be sure to like and subscribe as I post consistent Texans content, so if you do like the Texans, please consider liking and subscribing, or if you just like the NFL in general, I would really appreciate the support. On Nick Caserio though, he's someone who inherited disaster. When he took over in 2021, this wasn't a normal rebuilding job. This was probably the worst roster situation in football. The Texans lacked premium draft capital, had one of the oldest rosters in the league, and still hadn't found any answers at quarterback. Most general managers inherit one or two foundational pieces, but in my opinion, Nick Caserio inherited almost nothing. Instead of making flashy moves to speed up the rebuild, he stayed patient. He accumulated draft picks, he signed affordable veterans, he rebuilt the locker room, and most importantly, he waited until the right opportunity presented itself. That patience changed the trajectory of the franchise. And now I'm going to take you to the draft that changed everything. The defining moment of Caserio's career came in the 2023 NFL Draft. The Texans selected CJ Stroud with the second overall pick. Almost immediately, Stroud looked like a franchise quarterback. He won Offensive Rookie of the Year, he led Houston to the playoffs, and completely changed the expectations for this organization. But Caserio wasn't finished. Minutes later, he traded him back to the top 3 to draft Will Anderson Jr. And at the time, people criticized that move. The Texans gave significant draft capital, and many thought it was an overpay. Fast forward a couple seasons, Will Anderson became Defensive Rookie of the Year and has already established himself as one of the best premier young edge rushers in football, finishing second in the DPOY rankings last year. Instead of ending the draft with one franchise cornerstone, Houston walked away with 2. And that is the type of move that does change an organization. But one thing I love about Nick Caserio is that he's a general manager that doesn't just hit home runs, and that's what separates him from others. Almost everyone talks about Stroud, Will Anderson, but great GMs aren't judged by just one draft pick. They're judged by their entire body of work. And Nick Caserio continues to find talent throughout the draft. Nico Collins developed from a third-round selection into one of the NFL's best receivers. Derek Stingley, although being drafted 3rd overall, many questioned him to be picked over Sauce Gardner with the injury concerns, but he's developed into one of football's elite cornerbacks. Kamari Lassiter in the 2nd round stepped in immediately and looked like a veteran and is now, in my opinion, a top 10 cornerback in NFL. Kalen Bullock quickly became a starter in Houston's secondary after being drafted in the 3rd round, and now the Texans have added another promising group featuring Jaden Higgins, Jalen Knoll, and in this year's draft class, Keelan Rutledge, Caden McDonald. Notice the pattern? Houston isn't relying on expensive free agency to build its core. We're developing young players through the draft, and that is what you call sustainable success. But he does have one strength that I feel like people do not recognize enough, and that is his cap management. Nick Caserio, honestly, this is clearly his biggest strength. Every NFL team has the same amount of money to spend. The difference is how they choose to spend it. Some general managers hand out 5-6 years contracts hoping players stay elite. If those players decline, though, the organization gets trapped, the cap becomes a mess. Think about Tua Tagovailoa with the Dolphins. Eventually, you're forced to cut productive players just to stay under the limit. But the Texans rarely find themselves in that position. That's because Nick Caserio approaches contracts differently. Rather than locking veterans into lengthy deals, he often prefers shorter contracts with competitive annual salaries. At first glance, that seems strange. Why wouldn't players want longer contracts? Well, that's because the NFL salary cap keeps rising. Every new television deal increases the market. Every offseason, top players make more money than they did the year before. If a player signs a 6-year contract today, there's a good chance he's underpaid in 3 years. And Nick Caserio understands this. Instead of trapping players in long-term deals, he gives them opportunities to hit free agency again while they're still productive. That gives veterans even another chance to earn market value. Players appreciate it, agents appreciate it, and it makes Houston an attractive destination around the league. It creates trust. Players know the Texans aren't trying to squeeze every last year out of them. They're willing to reward performance and allow players another opportunity to cash in. And from Houston's perspective, it's brilliant. If a player declines, the Texans aren't stuck with a massive contract. If he outperforms his deal, then you got massive value, aka Nico Collins. It's low risk, high reward. Look at Danielle Hunter. The Texans initially signed him to a 2-year contract. The reward is his production with the consecutive 1-year extensions instead of committing to a long-term deal late into his 30s. Sheldon Rankins returned on his 1-year deal, proved his value, and earned another extension. Even Azeez Al-Shaair earned a new deal after he was a perfect fit in DeMeco Ryans' defense. Notice the trend? The Texans don't pay based on a player's potential. They pay based on a player's production. And because of that philosophy, the Texans always have options. Need to extend CJ Stroud? There's room. You needed to pay Will Anderson? Well, there was room. Need to keep Derek Stingley? Already planned for. Need to add another veteran, aka Reed Blankenship? They can. Meanwhile, other contenders spend every offseason trying to figure out who they have to cut just to become salary cap compliant. Nick Caserio avoids that completely. And that's because he knows when to walk away. And that's one of the hardest parts of being a general manager, is knowing when to not spend. Nick Caserio has shown time and time again that he won't overpay simply because a player is popular. Saquon Barkley got a bag from the Eagles, but Nick Caserio didn't want to overpay. Some Texans fans would say, yeah, we'd love Saquon Barkley here, but would you love the amount of money that you're paying him? Nick Caserio will let productive veterans leave if the contract no longer makes sense. Then he'll reinvest those resources into younger talent, draft picks, or more cost-effective players. The discipline is incredibly difficult, and it's understandable that fans hate seeing good players leave. But championship organizations don't make emotional decisions. They make smart financial ones, which I believe Nick Caserio does. And another thing that Nick Caserio really embodies is the fact that culture really does matter in the NFL. And arguably his best move of all was hiring DeMeco Ryans. Instead of chasing the newest offensive genius like a Clint Kubiak, he hired a leader. Someone players genuinely want to play for and will continue to want to play for. Someone who changed the culture from day one. Texans were a laughingstock before DeMeco came in, and the year afterward, they were in the playoffs winning a playoff game. Players believe in DeMeco. They believe in Caserio. They believe in the Texans' vision. And when your players believe in the organization, free agents notice, the entire league notices, veterans notice. That's how winning organizations are built. So no, Nick Caserio didn't rebuild the Texans with one draft, although he got it massively right in 2023. He didn't rebuild them with one free agent signing, albeit Danielle Hunter is one of the best edge rushers in the league. But Nick Caserio rebuilt the Texans, through patience. He had elite drafting, he had smart trades, disciplined spending, outstanding salary cap management with the restructures, the re-signings, and, moving money into void years, but understanding the salary cap is going to increase. And with that salary cap management, he had a long-term vision that very few general managers have. Most front offices attempt to win this season now. Nick Caserio is trying to keep the Texans competitive for the next decade. If that's the difference, and if CJ Stroud brings Houston its first Super Bowl, people will remember the quarterback, people will remember the head coach in DeMeco Ryans, but they should also remember the man who quietly built the foundation that made all of it possible. And that's Nick Caserio. That's exactly why I believe he's one of the smartest general managers in all of football. Thank you all so much for watching this video. If you did enjoy it, please be sure to like, subscribe. And as always, it's Texans Takeover, and I'm out. Peace.